From the inception of cinema in 1894 up until the advent of sound a little over 3 decades later, cinema had steadily been developing its own language. Filmmakers were constructing their very own art form separate from literature, paintings, and the stage, with many of them adding something vital to the medium. D.W. Griffith with his parallel editing and elaborate set work, Charlie Chaplin using physical comedy to explore real-world social issues, Buster Keaton and Harold Lloyd with their incredible stunt work. Throughout the first 2 decades of cinema, its techniques had grown at a steady pace, but once the 1920s came around, the art form boomed. In no small part due to the German Expressionist movement that decade, in which filmmakers emphasized the internal emotions of characters through the external world around them, utilizing bold, exaggerated set design and lighting, with notable pioneers of this style being Fritz Lang, Robert Wiene, and F.W. Murnau. Lang had given us Destiny in 1921, Wiene gave us The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari that same year, and Murnau shook the world the following year in 1922 with his unlicensed adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula, Nosferatu. Whether the films leaned more into expressionism or realism, comedy or drama or horror, cinema was experiencing a revolution in the 1920s, on track to become an art form on the level of those aforementioned, a purely visual art form, as the reliance on title cards was becoming less and less, with filmmakers coming up with new ways to convey visually the thoughts, feelings, and actions of their characters. But then in 1927 came the jazz singer.
Wait a minute, you ain't heard nothing yet.
The revolution of a purely moving visual art form had ceased to exist practically overnight to make way for a new cinematic revolution. And in no time, studios shifted to making sound pictures, and within the next 3 to 4 years, silent cinema had become a thing of the past. But luckily, the techniques that silent cinema had been developing for those 30-odd years hadn't gone to waste. Most of those techniques made their way over into the sound era, such as Eisenstein's montage theory and Carl Dreyer's impressive use of close-ups exhibited in The Passion of Joan of Arc. But the vision that filmmakers of the early to mid-1920s had of what cinema was going to be was completely changed. And yet, that particular revolution didn't remain incomplete. In fact, it was fulfilled 3 years before The Jazz Singer came out, because 2 years after Nosferatu, F.W. Murnau showed the world his true potential as a filmmaker. A film that, from a technical and storytelling standpoint, made Nosferatu look like a warm-up. In 1924, Murnau released The Last Laugh, a film about a doorman who gets demoted to bathroom duties due to his old age and falls further into despair with no sense of direction in his life now. The film uses only 2 title cards in the whole film, which aren't even dialogue cards, rather an introduction to the film at the very beginning, which basically surmises the basic concept of the film in just a couple sentences, and the second serving as a brief bit of narration before the very final scene, which isn't even really meant to convey information to the audience that couldn't be done otherwise, since all that is already done within the next scene itself through the use of a character reading a newspaper, but instead serves as an admission that the ending is quite an unrealistic one, in a way turning the film into a fable at the very end, rather than something that is actually likely to happen. This final title card essentially makes it so that you can accept the ending at face value, or you can interpret it as a dream, a fantasy. And those are quite literally all the title cards that appear in the film. There are 2 moments that have text on the screen, but both of those come from newspapers that characters within the world of the film are reading. And the most notable achievement of this film is that there are 0 title cards that contain dialogue from the characters. This is an entirely dialogue-free film that uses its brilliant camera movements, framing, editing, set design, and acting to communicate everything about the story. Murnau uses several techniques to convey this story. In the very first scene, we are treated to some exciting camera work as the elevator descends down to the lobby, and we come out of it and onto the street as our main character, known only as the doorman, carries the various guests' belongings in and out of the hotel. We feel the intoxicating rush that the doorman himself feels from his job, and the respect that he receives from the notable people of society. He has a sense of dignity in his position, which makes his demotion all the more heartbreaking. We see in this scene that he is starting to struggle with the physical aspect of the job and has to rest for a minute, and the hotel manager takes notice of this. Just like all silent films, Murnau relies on actors' more exaggerated gestures and body language to communicate everything, but those are of even greater importance here due to there being no dialogue shown on the screen. We clearly see for ourselves everything happening, and Murnau brilliantly uses repetition and contrast between similar scenarios to communicate the story. We see early on as the doorman is proud of his position in life. Likewise, we witness his feeling of defeat when he is told of his demotion later on, and of his sense of shame when he sees the new doorman. We witness the respect that he receives from his niece and the bridegroom's wife, the latter of whom helps to dress him in his doorman uniform one morning. In contrast, we see her shame and disgust at finding out that he works in the bathroom now when she comes to visit him during work. And we see that he is taken notice of at the party in his apartment building and is respected by all. And also in contrast, we see gossip spreading later in the film when word gets out of his demotion, becoming the neighborhood laughingstock in the process, his reputation having completely flipped. We even get to see the contrast between his behavior toward the old man who works in the bathroom at the end of the film versus how he was treated in that same position by others earlier. While The Last Laugh doesn't constitute the label of German expressionism to the extent that Metropolis, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, or Murnau's own Faust do, a film that he would make 2 years later, we do still get a couple scenes that echo that movement's goal of externalizing the internal world of the characters. Particularly two sequences, one in which early special effects are utilized to show the hotel collapsing onto our disgraced doorman when he is at a low point, as well as a dream sequence he has in which he can lift any baggage with superhuman ease with a crowd watching him in awe. And we are easily told this is a dream without needing any dialogue or narration from the brilliant dissolve that merges the doorman's face and the revolving doors of the hotel into one beautiful image to communicate the descent into his mind. The camera work even changes within the dream to be more out of focus and jittery to communicate the unsteadiness of this scenario. We even understand in the scene toward the end of the film exactly the type of disgust that the others in the doorman's building feel toward him now, after learning of his demotion. No words are needed, and not even much movement, just a few shots of the others and of the doorman looking at each other, ending with the doorman exiting the building in shame. That is all we need in order to understand what has happened. And more now regular Emil Jannings gives one of the best performances in all of silent cinema. Everything about his mental state is so clearly understood through the brilliant use of his body and facial expressions. The Last Laugh is one of the purest distillations of what cinema can be, and is the culmination of the entire silent era. And while I'm personally grateful that sound came along, as it's given us the opportunity to tell a much wider variety of stories, I do sometimes wish the silent era had gone on about a decade longer in order to see what new achievements in pure visual storytelling filmmakers might have brought us. But even as it stands, at least one silent film managed to fulfill the promise that silent cinema had been building toward for 3 decades, and the tools and lessons brought to us by The Last Laugh have been and will be carried on by countless others.